Welcome to our global tour of innovation hubs in crisis response mode. The first stop on our global tour to visit different technology communities and different hubs to see how they've reacted during the corona pandemic in terms of crisis response and providing services to their communities is Singapore. And I'm very excited to meet Saad Chinoy now, who is the co-founder of Sputnik Lab, an initiative to improve internet accessibility in Singapore. But Saad also volunteers in several nonprofit organizations. He's an executive board member of Engineering Good, where he does some amazing work, including re-engineering toys for children with disabilities, and is basically part and maker and shaker of every maker, hacker, repair, or social tech community that Singapore has to offer. Thanks so much for joining us today, Saad. I also like to add very proudly that you're a board member of the Global Innovation Gathering. And yeah, it's great to have you there, and it's great to have you here as well today. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. Yes, it definitely is, I think, one of the things that I'm most proud of is being part of the Global Innovation Gathering. But yes, in Singapore, the thing that has kept me busy more than anything else is the work that I've been doing with Engineering Good. We've been sort of called into the response, community response for trying to address the gaps that the digital divide is sort of exposed, even in a place that is super connected and super sort of futuristic in most people's minds. Singapore is very affected by the digital divide. And so that's what Engineering Good sort of rose to the challenge and was able to, I think, create quite a lot of impact over the whole pandemic period. It has been quite a whirlwind, like it has been for everyone around the world. We've been grappling with change in a manner that we don't fully understand. And so being responsive and reactive to situations with a mindset of, being open, thinking out of the box, and trying to do new things where there is no standard approach. And that's very much in line with the maker mindset. So I think, even though the pandemic is by no means done, we're not out of this yet. I think we've sort of seen the maker community worldwide shine in ways that we never expected. With Engineering Good, we were, as you said in the introduction there, we were preoccupied with serving the assistive tech needs of persons with disabilities. And we were a small group of volunteers and volunteer engineers who would sort of spare time after their day jobs, busy being engineers, to come and do things that were sort of fulfilling and volunteer the time, effort, and skill to solve very specific problems for persons with disabilities.
That's one of the amazing projects you've been busy with the last couple of months. But I know you've also been involved in new projects that came up specifically to address problems people were having during the corona pandemic. And maybe just as a bit of intro, I gather you're in a space that is a kind of makerspace right now. And so I also gather through that it's possible to go places at the moment in Singapore.
Yes, I mean, Singapore is currently very fortunate in being one of the few places that the number of community cases has been handled. It has stayed at 0 until this morning, when we got a report of one person who showed up, whose COVID test came back positive, and unfortunately, this person is 83 years old, and he happens to be on a cruise ship with 1,000 odd other people.
That sounds terrible. Let's not go there now. Let's rejoice in the fact that Singapore has nearly 0 case numbers at the moment. But of course, in the early stages of the pandemic, so in the spring, a lot of countries, and that included Singapore, were faced with a homeschooling situation and what you were calling circuit breakers, I believe. And yes. So the digital divide that you were speaking about earlier became really apparent in that situation, because not all people who had to stay at home had the right devices. So maybe you can share with us a little bit how you rose to the occasion to provide support in that situation.
I mean, it feels like it was ages ago now, but this was just a few months back. And before Singapore went into what we're still calling the circuit breaker, the idea of staying at home and working from home extended to students and children who would have to not go to school, and so they would have to stay at home and attend classes through home-based learning. And the assumption was, quite optimistic that since this is Singapore and we've got Wi-Fi and broadband fiber coming out of the ears, everybody has access to stable, good quality internet, which turned out to be not exactly true. And so the government did have programs. The Ministry of Education did have like laptop loan schemes and such. And the response was cobbled together as soon as possible, and they did quite a good response, I think. But there were things that fell through the cracks and unexpected shortfall that it wasn't anticipated. And so it started off with a very simple request. One of the beneficiaries, or one of the partners that we worked with in the past with persons with disabilities, they deal with families with low income or families that have specific needs. And they came forward and said, look, there has been an announcement that students are going to have to stay at home and parents are going to have to work from home. There are a couple of families that have come forward and said, we don't have enough devices to support both these activities. Can you help us out? You've helped us out in the past, and you're a bunch of engineers. So, can you just ask in your group of volunteers, see if anybody has a spare laptop, and then it'll be before the circuit breaker takes effect, these families will be sorted. And this was a request for 4 laptops. And so we thought, all right, that'll be quick. We'll get people in, we'll get the laptops, we'll ask for donations, we'll clean them up, and we'll send them to these families. And then, we can all go back to dealing with the pandemic on our own. But it didn't stop there. I mean, things went rapidly escalated. Not only did the number of requests increase, as in a lot of other community organizations came forward and said, look, you guys are asking for laptops, but we also need some. We've got families that are struggling with many, many other things, and the laptop would really help and go a long way. Can you just ask for more? Or if you happen to have extra ones, can we have them? And so while the number of requests increased over a weekend, it had quadrupled. And so then we quickly responded on social media and said, look, we welcome people to donate even more laptops. And at the same time, and this is the most heartening thing, is that the number of people who put up their hand and said, you know what, I want to help. I know something about laptops. I'm an IT guy, or whatever. I know how to drive from one place to the next. I have a car. The number of people that came forward and said, I'm happy to help with this, was just phenomenal. I mean, so we had an increase in demand, we had an increase in donations, we had an increase in volunteers. So then the challenge became that can Engineering Good, as a tiny little nonprofit charity organization, manage to hold it all together and grow with demand and meet the need. So that's what we've been struggling with, and it's been months now, and we've sent out, I think, 3,000 laptops.
I'm sorry, everybody. That was my postman, who's a wonderful postman, knocking on my window, trying to tell me he's delivering something. And I was trying to ignore him, but it didn't really work. So that's how this journey began. And it sort of ended in what I imagine is you providing every child who was lacking a computer in Singapore with their own device. At least it sounded like it was in a massive scaled effort to provide devices to children who would have otherwise not had them, which is really, really inspiring, especially looking at the fact that this is something that would be so needed in so many countries around the world. We have exactly the same situation here in Germany, where it's even perhaps more grave in the sense that we already have a country where people from low income backgrounds or families that didn't enjoy higher education are more likely to have worse education themselves as well, or lower education. And so it's a sort of continued pattern that exists already, but deepened through the corona pandemic. Is there any advice that you would like to share to other tech communities listening, like how to pull this kind of thing off?
That's a difficult one. We barely had the time and space sort of to meet the requirements and keep everything together, like, personally, as well as professionally, as well as, because we're an organization that depends entirely on volunteers. We had 2 staff, actually 1.5, as in one was part-time. We had 2 people as considered staff before the pandemic, and now we are proud to say that we have 3 staff, which is as big as much as Engineering Good can handle. So the number of volunteers and the amount of time that they were able to sort of give was the only thing that kept us going through the whole pandemic situation. And now that I think back, I think the nature of the volunteers that came forward under these circumstances was completely different from the sort of volunteers that we would work with in the past. I mean, the sort of response to and recognition of the need was on a whole different level. And so my advice, I guess, would be to build that community and engage that community and keep them engaged as much as humanly possible, regardless of the consequences, regardless of the circumstances. I mean, if times are good, you don't just sit back and say, okay, like, you know, we've got enough volunteers, everything will be fine. We don't really need to continue engaging people. We know our circle of people. We're just gonna, you know, do what we can. I suggest, I think, you know, looking back, the thing that we should do more, even as Engineering Good, is to continue to engage more diverse groups of people. And I think that's kind of what we're doing now, but we haven't really had a chance to sort of sit down and think about being strategic about this. I mean, we're still very much in sort of response mode.
So maybe, yes, maybe we can close with a little bit of an outlook. Now that you've equipped all these school children with laptops, what's the next step? You said it seems like a long time ago that all this happened. What are you busy with right now, and how is Engineering Good, but maybe also the other tech communities or spaces that you're involved in, still busy trying to support their communities during the pandemic?
So the strange thing that happened in this transition was that I found myself trying to figure out where I would fit best. I mean, the number of people that came forward, they sort of, you know, put up their hands and said, you know, I've got some experience with this, I will handle logistics. In fact, we got very lucky with that. We had somebody who had a PhD in logistics and was able to handle all of the picking up and dropping of donor laptops and to the person who was sitting at home to clean them up and then send them back to us, and then we would send them to the beneficiaries. So there was a lot of logistics. Everybody had to work from home. And without this one person coordinating this, it would have been next to impossible. But at the same time, what ended up happening was that we got a lot of corporate donors who said, look, we've got a whole bunch of laptops that would otherwise go to a secondhand store or, you know, be returned to the manufacturer for in exchange for a new model. Instead of doing that, why don't we give them to you? And so we had to scale up and then handle, write a little bit of script and some software to try and handle large quantities of the same kind of laptop. So we built all this kind of automation in, and again, that was a volunteer-led effort, but now it's led to a point where we had donated laptops that would wind up being set aside because they required more time to process. And that just wound up becoming a tower of laptops that were sort of unloved or required more attention than people had the time to devote. And that wound up becoming what we now know as Salvage Garden. It was put into a small little corner that was written Salvage Yard, and we don't really have yards in Singapore. So then it changed into Salvage Garden. And now that is turned into a space that takes a laptop that cannot be turned on, opens it up, and then figures out what's wrong with it, and puts it back together again, maybe steal some parts from another broken laptop and then turn it into what we call a Franken laptop. And so, you know, it's like a workshop, and that's become a makerspace. Because I got involved and said, no, this is exactly what a makerspace is for. And so let's take what we're doing with laptops, apply it to what we're doing with assistive tech devices, where we're modifying toys and making them more accessible. It's exactly the same skills. We're using your basic rudimentary understanding of electronics, looking up YouTube videos, and then trying to solve a problem. So that's kind of where we're moving forward. We've called it Salvage Garden, and it's the makerspace that exists at Engineering Good. And I think it's the only one of its kind, as far as this part of the world is concerned, that has a makerspace that focuses on assistive tech and repurposing the e-waste. So that's what we want to move forward with.
That's so wonderful to hear. Thank you so much, Saad. It's really impressive. Like the story of what started with a request for 4 laptops has now become a thing and a place and something ongoing. And I really hope people hear this and also feel inspired by it to recreate this perhaps in other places. I really hope somebody feels inspired to create this in Germany as well. So thank you so much for your time today and for your amazing work and for being part of GIG.
Not at all. Thank you. It's an honor.
And to finish off our short visit to Singapore, here are some images from Salvage Garden, including some of a very important team member. And now we are traveling on to Nigeria.
Discssion Makers Hub is a community of innovators who are working to build inclusive, sustainable society for all. We are based in Abuja, Nigeria, where we host a makerspace. We also regularly deploy mobile labs across the country. At Phil Square Makers Hub, we are open to all creatives. For us, maker means everyone who is trying to contribute their quota to solving whatever problems are in their society. We began in 2019 with a series of science outreaches across Nigeria. The aim for us was to increase interest in STEM for young people, democratize science education, but also with teachers, it was important for us to identify ways to support the Nigerian science curriculum. This led us to the Volt microscope. The digital microscope, it's portable, it magnifies up to 1,000 times, and it's manufactured in our space in Abuja. Now, this gave rise to Volt School. Volt School is an online learning platform that provides STEM education for young people. So even though our space has been closed since the 29th of March of 2020, we've been working as a team remotely. So with our team of engineers, with our graphic designers, and most importantly, with our makers who became teachers to make sure that the kids in Africa were learning. In the arts community, we've worked with a member of our hub who is a sculptor to host a COVID-19 themed virtual art exhibition. This took place during the lockdowns, and it ensured that the arts community became very involved in a public health issue, informing and inspiring the community. We had 26 artists from across Africa. We had people from Nigeria, from Liberia, from Kenya, and from Europe. We had over 4,000 visitors from 240 cities in the world. We need more funding. We would like to be able to cascade the seasonal rainfall prediction maps to the rural farmers. What we would really like to do is to be able to deploy a solution where the farmer can query the database, perhaps through an SMS. As I speak, in Anambra State, Southeast Nigeria, there are 4 local government areas underwater now. These 4 local government areas are also the food basket of that state. It means that there's going to be a lot of food insecurity. That's the sort of thing that we want to be able to work on. We also want to be able to get more students on Volt School. We want to be able to provide devices. We want to be able to provide data scholarships and allowances for the teachers to help them keep doing what they are doing.
The next stop on the little global tour we're taking you on is Nigeria. And I'm now really excited to speak to Obagisun Ayodele, who is the co-founder and chief technical officer at Vil Square, which is a social impact organization that connects communities to the global digital economy. Oba's work focuses on the combination of research, strategy, and the innovative use of technology to support the local communities that they're working with in Nigeria. And we've just seen a video that really shows how you've been trying to service these communities throughout the pandemic. First of all, Oba, thank you so much for joining us today and for taking the time to be part of the session.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So
Can you tell me, it's really impressive to see the projects that you created, including the virtual exhibition you did around COVID. It must have been quite a ride finding yourself under, I believe Nigeria was also under a hard lockdown for quite some time. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yes. So initially, before the whole COVID pandemic situation happened, last year when we were dots at Nakuru, we gave a broad presentation of how we saw the future for African countries that were so dependent on oil revenues. And we said a time will come when there would be a challenge with oil revenues, and this would dip, and it would probably launch the whole countries, all the citizens and everything, and the whole economy into like some sort of recession. And what we're trying to do was quickly empower individuals, communities, cluster communities in all these different regions across Africa to be able to move quickly to the digital-driven economy. So where you have things like future of work, where you have businesses that are powered by the digital economy, where you have cashless systems where people can easily buy things, get logistics, and all those different angles sorted out. And then in January, we came into a new year, and by February, we were hearing about COVID, and March, we had to go on an immediate lockdown. And we already have built this robust community of experts from across, majorly from Nigeria, but also across, East Africa, West Africa. And we realized that these people were locked up at home. They didn't have the right resources to be able to continue their businesses in all these different cluster communities. So what we tried to do was to empower them with technology such that they still could express that skill which they have, express the work they do, but now in a digital form. And something interesting for us was the art community, which we looked into. We realized that all the exhibitions that were hosted in physical spaces, the galleries were closed, and all these different places that usually would serve as a source of relief for tension in society were closed. They were not hangout places anymore. So what we decided to do was to work with this our community of artists, which we already have built over the years, and see if we could reinforce hope, reinforce belief, from all the sad news of what the pandemic has caused. And so we had the virtual art exhibition, which at the time was like the first in Nigeria. Like no one had ever seen something like that before. Even across Africa, it was relatively new. And we launched it. We reached across 58 countries with over 4,000 visitors on the platform, 240 cities, across the world. And we were blown away by the amazing remarks and feedback we got from visitors. Some of the visitors said this lifted their spirit up. Somebody even sent a message of how she had just lost her grandmother to COVID, and just going through the gallery and through the exhibition which we had put online, she felt a relief. She felt like this was a way for her to channel all the grief that she had. So it was a really a spiritual kind of connection which we had via that platform, which was really very successful.
I think that's so powerful, and it makes so much sense the way you just explained it, because the one thing we're all, of course, lacking during COVID is also the possibility to have a joint cultural experience, to go to a museum or a gallery together, to go to the movie theater or a concert. So by creating this virtual exhibition, you also created a shared cultural space. I was lucky enough to be part of the crowd when you were giving your presentation last year in Nakuru for, as you said, DOTS, back when the Global Innovation Gathering was still able to convene physically. And it was quite visionary then. Did you in some ways feel, not not in a gloaty way, but in a way that you thought, it's good that we had these concepts in our mind and that we knew how to work digitally and decentrally, now that the real hard, hard time to like exemplify and live up to this has come?
Mhm. Well, you know, it's the one time in my life where I wished I was wrong. And we all wished that all the hypotheses and all the, you know, all the forecasts about what is going to happen in the future was wrong. And, you know, when we started View Square, we had one thing, you know, in our minds, and that was to basically demystify digital transformation for people across Nigeria and across Africa. And we went at it from more of a research methodological way approach to it, rather than just doing, you know, trial and error processes. So by the end of last year, we already had built a network of retainerships of businesses, you know, small, medium enterprises across all, you know, Nigeria, who we were more or less helping them transform from this analog brick and mortar way of doing their processes, you know, to a more digital driven, you know, approach, and, you know, more advanced processes, you know, having their processes in the cloud and all the different, you know, paradigms to it. And so, on coming to 2020, we felt glad that we had started early, because then a lot of people reached out to us and asked, how can we go about this? How can we improve trust online? You know, we started having conversation on identity polarization, you know, and started having so many interesting, you know, thematic areas, which earlier on we had been discussing in our R&D centers, but people didn't find the importance for these things. But now it's very important, because then you start looking at things like, we didn't have data sponsorships before. You know, now you have events and people have to be concerned about internet penetration in rural areas across Africa, and all these different things. So on one hand, we are sad about the results of this, but we're also happy that we started thinking ahead, you know, before all the whole pandemic thing happened. So yes, so we are very happy we took the lead then, and now we are able to say we are empowering local communities across Nigeria, across Africa, with technology that can easily help them transform whatever they do in whatever sector to the digital economy.
There's a lot of amazing things that you do, and we saw some of them in the video, not just the exhibition, but being able to provide training online and decentrally. Maybe you can talk us through some of the current activities that you have going on.
Yes. Okay. So along the line, we realized that we had 39 million Nigerian students who were more or less at home because of COVID-19, and so we're trying to solve this problem, and we realized that the main problem is not trying to find a vaccine for COVID. For Africa, the main problem isn't trying to find a vaccine for COVID. The main problem isn't trying to find a cure. Yes, it's important, you know, it's important to find diagnostic tools, it's important to find therapeutics and all those different things. Yes, it's important. But the main problem was social issues. Access to good education, access to clean water, access to food. So we said, instead of we trying to invest the limited resources which we have into research in vaccines or a diagnostic kit, or, you know, and all this high research high cost kind of research, why don't we invest these limited resources we have into social issues? One of them is access to good education. So what we did was to quickly deploy a alpha light version of an online learning platform, and we put it out there called the Vote School. And the goal of it was to bring STEM to the homes of students who have been out of school because of COVID. And it was so exciting for us that at the first week of launch, we were able to have like 100 students come on board and start learning on these platforms. Now, what we did was to also engage with the communities of experts which were built. These are experts who have backgrounds in engineering, backgrounds in sciences, background in medicine. And so we bring all these people together to create digital content for these students and put it online for free. So we bring them on board, they're volunteering to create the content, more or less like audiovisual content, and they put it online, and it's easily accessible by any student with a 2G mobile phone from any part of Nigeria or across Africa. And initially we opened it up to 5 countries, and we were blown away. We were blown away. From the 100, in a matter of 1 month, we grew to over 1,000 students. And now we're across 9 countries with that platform. We've pivoted it from just for COVID, and it's now open, as a continuous learning inclusive platform for anyone from across Africa. We have over 7,000 students who come there every day, spend 30 minutes on the platform every single day to learn. We've partnered with 2 universities in Nigeria, Obafemi Awolowo University and the Federal University for Agriculture. And what we're trying to do with them is deploy virtual science labs on it. We've actually deployed it already. So we have the early access of the platform on throguh right now. And anyone from anywhere across Africa can easily plug in on this platform. Just go to a link and be able to learn and have access to a virtual science lab. We took it some step further. We partnered with some League of Imams in Liberia to bring this learning platform to their Islamic schools. Mm-hmm. And so while they're learning the Quran, so there's this thing called Ile Kewu that is known in Africa. So you go to a Quranic school. While you're learning the Quranic school, you can also be able to learn Western kind of, in quotes, education, right? So you can have the balance of it. We also took it further, and some of the community people even deployed an offline throguh, which is a small device. And it basically fits in your pocket. You can take it to a rural area that has no access to internet at all. And you can broadcast like a hotspot, and 30 children across can log in with your username and sit and take this, watch this audiovisual content. So there's a lot. I can go on and on about all the amazing things which we're doing with throguh across Africa.
It's really impressive and really amazing to hear. I'm generally in awe, but also because here in Germany, it's a huge issue during first lockdown where the schools were closed, and now the schools are being desperately kept open, but also because nobody took the time to think about any digital learning alternatives for school children in the first corona phase, which is quite shocking really, but the sort of quite desolate state of digital education in Germany. So I think we could profit from the Vault platform here as well. And I really love how, it's like a silver lining in the crisis, that making this accessible to people with a perspective of it keeping open beyond COVID and just being able to reach more people than you may have with the programs that you're giving in your hub itself is also just, the exact kind of maker entrepreneurial thinking. Very well represented right there.
Yes.
Maybe you can just mention a few next steps and also perhaps ways that one can support your work.
Yeah. Yes. So, so there's something which we're working on. It's actually out there already. We're working on it. It's an ongoing project. It's called the Vault microscope. And the Vault microscope is a low-cost, affordable microscope that any researcher in any university can have a personal labware for themselves. And they can take it home. They don't have to be in the labs to do research. They can be at home and still undergo research. It's something interesting which I also want to just add to all the things which I've been saying. It's something which we put out there in March when the lockdown started, and we're in 5 universities now in Nigeria. having over 100 researchers who use these microscopes for different kinds of research. So from people from geophysics who are using it to look at, special dust like sapphire, so people in microbiology who are looking at bacterial and all types of parasites, people in biology, and the community is just growing so interestingly. So moving on to what next steps. For us, we need more collaboration. We're open to collaboration. We can't do this alone. It's a robust vision which we have, and we can't go on this journey alone. We need all the support which we can get in terms of collaboration, in terms of yes, we need more funds, to drive and pilot most of all these initiatives across Nigeria and even across Africa. So yes, we're open to collaboration. We're open to a lot of partnerships, like collaboration from the gig community, which is really, really great. We've met a lot of great people there who have just giving you one constructive feedback. Why don't you make it this way? Or why don't you make it that way? And that's just that one line can be everything which will make the difference for your product or for, whatever initiative which you're trying to deploy.
Absolutely. I'm losing your video signal a little bit, but I hope everybody still understood what you said. I'm just going to repeat that if anybody's watching who wants to collaborate on a content level, so both on the projects like the microscope, really hands-on projects, and contributing perhaps also different forms of content to platforms like Vault, but also anybody who wants to support finance is super welcome. And I know this is not the most interactive session, but you can meet Oba later in a meetup that we have coming up on open science and engage and have a chat there. So hopefully see you later at that session. Thanks so much for the interview, and please stay safe and keep doing the amazing work you're doing. The next stop I'd like to take you to is Uganda to meet the team from Platform Africa, and we're going to start with a short video.
My name is Charlotte Ainebiona. I am Community Manager at Platform Africa. We are an innovation space initiated by South Sudanese refugees to empower displaced communities in Uganda. We provide capacity building workshops for refugee communities that emphasize entrepreneurial skills, hands-on technology, and open hardware and critical making, media skills, and promoting peaceful coexistence through hate speech mitigation workshops, radio, and psychological support programs. Communities impacted by conflict and displacement are often faced with poor access to education, skills development programs, and limited livelihood opportunities. We believe that these communities have the creativity and potential to create a different reality even while in refugee camps, and that they are an asset to development of their communities and the hosting country. Thus, we work to create the platform and environments where refugees may find empowerment that will translate to tangible and transformative opportunities through hope, technology, innovation, and training. We make differences at the grassroots by providing youth access to skills and knowledge. Our mobile makerspace and hands-on training components enable the community to access critical training, tools, and support in order to solve local problems, from repair cafes, building networks boosting discs in the internet unstable places of the refugee camps, to soap making workshops for women. We are providing the refugee community a new point of entry to sustainable development. To ensure the continuity of knowledge exchange and community empowerment, we run tribes. Think of it as a club. The tribes gather refugees and their host communities and cluster them according to the topics of interest, offering them an environment that supports them to co-create, train each other on peer-to-peer structures, and interface with experts. The sole aim of the tribes is to develop opportunities for skill development and knowledge transfer among refugees by building a strong community of people who are passionate to learn, share, and create solutions. From making solar units soaps, and others, these communities develop ideas and products that emerge into startups. They then access mentorship, space, internet, and electricity, given the fact electricity and internet are critical but almost difficult to access in the refugee setting. We also build guides and toolkits with open source resources on how to build a solar kit, open skills documentation, and training. Our mission is to facilitate the building of equitable, informed, and empowered communities to accelerate the transition to a sustainable future. We do so through a programming that places displaced communities at the center, critical skilling, and by providing an appropriate environment for local collaboration. Platform Africa, stepping up actions for community empowerment.
So we have just seen the lovely video from Platform Africa moderated by one of their team members, Charlotte, and I'm now met by Jacksana Soro, who was the founder of O-Space Lab in South Sudan, the second innovation space ever to sprout from that young nation, back then the world's youngest nation. But in 2016, he was forced to flee his home country due to the civil war and now lives in Rhino Camp, a refugee settlement, where he heads Platform Africa, the initiative that you just saw introduced by video. So thanks so much for taking the time to join us this evening, Jaisana. It was really inspiring to see the work that you do. And I kind of want to begin with a question. You work under crisis mode anyway, even when it's not COVID, because you work out of a refugee settlement. So what has the experience of the last half year been like for you, or the last 3/4 of a year, to already operate in a very difficult environment with people who have suffered trauma and displacement, and now maneuvering through the pandemic on top of everything?
Yeah, thank you very much. So since we started our work in 2016, actually, because that is when I moved into the refugee camp and got registered as a refugee. I'm a twice over refugee anyways. I was born in the refugee camp. My mother fled the first conflict in the 90s. So we ended up being born here anyways. According to the stories that I've heard from her about like how life had been for them as refugees, it's sort of the motivation why I started Platform Africa in the first place. They didn't go to school. They didn't have proper medical facilities and education and all of that. And that has sort of affected how, for example, they live that get employed and they cannot support even their families to go to school. So we started the idea of Platform Africa. How do we build platforms for people, for refugees, so that they can have a future beyond the conflict and beyond the disruption that has happened in their life, moving to a refugee camp. So when we moved into the refugee camp, we sort of, I would say, had a different lens into the issues that people in the communities are being faced. One thing for sure is that when people became refugees, a lot of the aid organizations, their focus is on first aid that is given to refugees. So how do we save life first? How do we make sure that people have shelter and all these kind of things? And then this sort of created a problem where a lot of issues that were very patent and very crucial were left out. So for example, issues of education, issues of mental health, and issues of peace building. When people came to the refugee camp, a lot of people faced a lot of challenges. Some people moved on foot over difficult terrains in the bushes to cross the border to Uganda. And then they come without a house, so they have mental issues that were not being addressed. And so our initiative started looking into some of the issues of mental health and psychosocial support, even if we are focused more on skills development. We also started looking more on peace building, because peace building is sort of like a cross-cutting issues in the refugee camp. Even right now, COVID-19 is sort of interconnected with how communities live together. You find that if I am from this community and I have COVID-19, every person is likely to hate my community because they think that I am bringing death to the people in the refugee camp. So this is one thing that we've been tackling, and it has been like, how do we see and find the intersection between technology and peace building and how people coexist? fake news on Facebook and WhatsApp have found a way to penetrate the refugee communities. One, because they can have power. So the people with funds are sort of relied on as the credible sources of information. And so there's this whole complex or issue of cross-border exchange of information. So information comes from South Sudan that are unverified, and then they tend to, take root on the ground and then tend to shape how people think about each other and divide communities. So we've been looking at peace building as a core issue that is very important in tying the communities together and building social cohesion. Um, but one of the most important areas that we've been focusing on is how we build the culture of quality education. And for us, that means that we enable people to earn skills because we recognize and realize that the conflict has sort of crushed a lot of people's life coping mechanisms. So we find there's a class of people who are unemployed and they're basically almost useless in the community. So how do we give them dignity? Um, and so we think that giving them skills that they are able to tech skills to repair radio, repair a computer, write a code on a computer, so that they become people that are able to become self-reliant and use the skills they earn to make businesses or get employed or become employable. Sorry. But we also look at education, the education sector, people who are going to school. One thing for sure is that I basically went to a school because I grew into a refugee camp where we can only talk about science in theory. But the question is, how far has that gotten us? It took me time until I am old for me to recognize and realize what a diode is. We've been talking about it in classes, but I don't know. I touched it, I think a few years ago and all of that. So we are right now bringing STEM skills to refugee schools so that refugees also have access to quality and equal education like other people everywhere. And also we hope that that is able to sort of, support their interest in sciences as a subject in whole. So basically, this is what we've been looking at. And I'm happy and proud to say that so far our approach and our work is very different from a lot of work that has been done in the refugee. Our work is very different from a lot of work that is being done in the refugee camp, because first of all we hear from the people in the community around exactly what they want. So our work is informed by the real needs on the ground. And also I think one advantage is that most of us are refugees, so we are making sure that we're able to place refugees at the center of our programs. A lot of times we find these programs that are brought into refugee camp, but they're designed either in Europe or somewhere. Our programs are designed in the refugee camp with consultation with local people, the youth, and the refugee leaders. And we're making sure that we're giving skills to refugees so that they own them and become self-sustainable. So that is basically how our programs are different from a lot of programs that are being implemented in the refugee camp.
Yeah, it's so impressive, your work, and of course makes so much sense, the approach that you just explained. I want to pick up on a couple of different things you said, because the person I was speaking to, I came from a tour from Nigeria to meet you. So I was speaking to Obagasun, and he was also talking about the necessity of practical STEM education and providing the tools for that. But I want to pick up on a different point that you made first, because I had the privilege of meeting Charlotte, who we just saw in the video, and some of your lovely team members when we met for the gig darts in Nakuru last year in Kenya. And I was so impressed by the fact that you have somebody who has a psychology background in your team, working as a coach and mentor. And when I sat down to speak with Charlotte, she said, yeah, sure, this is because we work in an environment where people have suffered trauma and they need different kind of counseling perhaps, and than in other innovation or maker hubs and landscapes. But in reality, there's a lot also that other hubs could learn from this, because the advice, the uncertainty that you live with when you become an entrepreneur, the kind of instabilities you have to deal with, the societal pressures, and all of those issues that make that kind of job so important in any innovation hub context. So it's like, this is something that other people should be looking at and learning from, really. And I think it showed in the video really well how you were trying to go about this practical education and really doing things together with people. So a really different approach, like you just explained, to other, other things that happen in refugee camps. How have you adapted to the COVID situation? Do you still meet in physically and practice your mentoring and training? Have you had to have other mechanisms that you introduced through being in lockdown, or how are you trying to keep practical and hands-on in the midst of a pandemic?
Yeah, awesome question. So when the pandemic started, I think I would say the people in the world, the communities that were very shocked and didn't know how to iterate and go forward from that point were people in the refugee camp. I remembered when the COVID-19 happened, a lot of aid organizations withdrew their staff because basically people didn't know what was going to happen. And also, like, our organization actually had to shut down for a period of a month or so, until we sort of started thinking, okay, we have the challenge of COVID-19. We also have the challenge that a lot of aid organizations are withdrawing because they didn't basically plan for that, on how they can operate in that kind of situation. So what do we do? So we started kind of like changing our approaches and our program. One of our flagship program that we run the refugee camp is a project called Kenda Together, which is learning together in the local language. We give books and library access to libraries in the refugee camp. So basically what we started doing is that how do we ensure education? How do we make sure that education continues? During the COVID-19, how do we ensure that our programs are able to continue besides the challenge of the COVID-19? So we started a program that is, we call it Ask the Podcast, Access to Skills and Knowledge Podcast. So what we basically did is one of the biggest challenges in the refugee camp, besides, because for me, I think that the COVID-19 didn't really bring the challenges in the refugee camp. It only sort of exacerbated an underlying problem or condition to worsen. So we had the issue of, like, lack of access to communication and information. We have a few radios that are not operating in the refugee camp. They operate outside the refugee camp. They are poor signal. The programs are not tailored for the refugees. This issue of language barrier. So when the COVID-19 happened, actually carrying out awareness was a bottleneck. How do you do that? So what we did is we distributed 100 speakers to refugees. And so the model is that we bring 5 different families together and they have one speaker. So if you put those numbers together, we reach over 100 more families. And then these are household heads. If you look at the people in the families, the number is bigger than that. So the people that we are reaching right now in Ochia is over 9,000 families that are being reached by our programs. So what we do is we train refugees to record programs, so COVID-19 awareness, educational programs, including science, maths, and all of that, because these kids who still want to go to school. We also included mental health programs that are recorded, for example, with the help of Charlotte in our team. And this is really necessary because we figured that the refugees who are still, battling with the challenge of sort of leaving your home, coming to a new place, losing your business, your home, or maybe your loved ones during a conflict. And now you have this challenge that you can greet your neighbor, you can hug, you can visit anymore. And it was the implementation of the SOPs was really strict in the refugee context, because you find that like a population of, like, say 9,000 people go to the same water point. So they try to like restrict the SOPs. So a lot of people were sort of like mentally stressed and all of that. So we also included recordings of that program to be able to reach to people during the pandemic. So far right now, I think our community are super, empowered and informed, because we have amazing programs that are recorded and given to them without them coming together. So this is how we started off. But right now we are sort of starting to introduce in-person meetings, and they are very small, usually gatherings of 5, 10 people, 15, who, we follow the SAPs. We have people wear masks and all of that. But we also engage people to come to the space to sort of learn techniques on how they can build their own, tap for water and washing in your house after, using, the latrine, all of that, but also just when someone comes to your house, having a space to wash before they come into the home would be very important, given the fact that, families are close, but then there's no way for you to clean your house and all of that. So there's taps where you step on for you to have water. There's taps where you tie on a rope and people can use to wash. So we're bringing people together, listen to the ideas and test them out so that people in the community can adopt them and use them during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also continued one of our programs. So before the COVID-19, we support women. One of our programs had been the fact that women are neglected because of very patriarchal ideas that exist in our communities. And also in the peace building space, mental health and all of that. So we started mental health programs that sort of grew into financial literacy programs and all of that. And we support these groups through training programs that sort of empower them to become independent and strong, and financially independent more especially. And so we have done shop making trainings in the past for these women. We have continued these programs during the pandemic with SOPs maintained for them to be able to make very important hygiene materials and resources, soap and all of that, which were a very big issue because shops are expensive. And this is because, for example, Rhinocam is located 45 or 48 kilometers away from the town. During the COVID-19 pandemic, transportation was halted. So it means more costs are sort of exerted on people who are, transporting goods and all of that. So you find basic stuff like salt and soap and all of that are super expensive for the local people to sort of get. So our training sort of empowered women to provide and close the gap of access to shop and all these hygiene materials, but then also they provide the value that the materials are locally made, the shop is locally made, so it's cheap for the people in the community to also afford. So these are some of the programs that we have sort of been working around during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that they're impactful, they're helping the people in the community. We have continued to also do small psychosocial support programs for a lot of CBOs, or community-based organizations, who are, I would say, the first respondents that responded to the COVID-19 situation when it happened. Like I said before, a lot of international aid organizations withdrew when the COVID-19 happened. So it happened that CBOs, people who are refugees, who feel the same challenges, who are affected by the problems, stepped up to respond to these issues, to create awareness and all of that. And we also realized that doing this in the face of a pandemic, you're fearing from your life, moving from home to home, might also sort of create this whole problem of, vicarious trauma and all of that. So we also have programs that we do with community-based organizations to sort of help them move towards this problem and navigate their way through the pandemic.
So interesting to hear. There's definitely a parallel to the conversation I just had with Oba, because they were also already pre-corona pandemic braced to work in conflict environments and looking at how to use the technologies and tools that they're using to empower their communities, although maybe different kind of communities, but in the similar sentiment that what you were just saying. So in a way, they were braced for the pandemic because they had a lot of these tools already. And it sounds like you definitely knew about the sensitivities and all the topics that you're dealing with from all the background that you and your team brought to the table. So that's fascinating to hear. What's also fascinating is just the bandwidth of the really important services that innovation hubs like your own is providing that to their communities, from Saad's initiative fixing and refurbishing laptops in Singapore, right down to teaching people how to build a tap or soap. And I think it also goes to show how technological innovation can mean so many things. And the methods and the tools that you apply are super state of the art, but in an appropriate technology context, you're also teaching people how to make soap. And all of that is part of the innovation that you bring. Maybe to end with, how can people support your work and where can they learn more about you if they're interested to connecting with some of the projects that you're running and other things?
Cool. So the best way to reach to us is through our Twitter or our Facebook page. The handles are platform NGO. So platform is a word, and then NGO. Not as in nothing going on, but as a non-governmental organization.
Certainly the opposite of nothing going on at your space. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely. And our Facebook pages. So if you go there, you're able to see our activities. We're also reachable. Our email is info@platformafrica.online. But yeah, I think one of the ways to support us is that we are still not, outside this whole bubble of COVID-19, and there's still more work to be done around access to information, which is super important, but also continuing with education programs and all of that. So we run, for example, right now, our education programs that are through the radio, but we also have hierarch boxes that we put digital content on, so that people without access to internet can still access educational materials, though in the offline environment. We are serving this 1.4 million people in the refugee camps in Uganda. In Rhino Camp, we are serving over 130,000 people. There's a lot of work to be done, and we would appreciate any kind of support in order to scale the impact of the work that we're doing. We have the lab mobile. With that, we're able to reach more people. Supporting that track to be able to move out there and take books to people and take trainings to people. That is super important. I would appreciate any of. So we also have speaker boxes that we're giving people in the community, and we still have a lot of work to do to ensure that the community is adequately reached and informed. So any person who wanna do the talk or whatever camp, that would be very much appreciated. Broadcasting materials, recorder, mic, and all of that. So that's it.
great. I'm going to summarize quickly because your connection was breaking up a little bit toward the end. And it's incredible to hear those numbers, just how many people you're reaching with your work. So definitely open for support, whether it's on a hardware side or on a funding side, to be able to scale your efforts to reach all those people in the refugee communities you're working for. Jacksana, thank you so much for being part of the session today. Thank you so much for being part of the GIG family, and for having such an amazing team and doing such great work. Please stay safe and healthy and keep doing it, and say hi to everybody at Platform Africa.
Thank you, Geraldine.
I'm going to press the stop button. In our world tour to find out how innovation hubs have reacted to the corona pandemic, we are now traveling from Uganda to the north of Brazil. And we are going to Olinda, and I'm very excited to talk now to Ricardo Ruiz, who is a researcher at the University of Pernambuco. He has over 20 years of working experience at the intersection of human rights, open technology, and social transformation, having worked in different projects, also for large tech companies. And today, Ricardo is managing programs on digital rights and critical making in northeastern Brazil, including the GIG's very own Caribous program, which he's also going to be speaking about in another DOT session tomorrow. But today, Ricardo is going to be sharing some experiences with us of how the maker innovation space Casa Criatura has managed to troop through the pandemic. Ricardo, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Hello, Geraldine. Thank you. Thank you
Hi.
very much. It's always nice to talk with you and to present the work we've been doing here. And yeah.
I also want to add, for full transparency, but also because I'm terribly proud of it, that you are also part of the board. It's the supervisory board of GIG, and we get to do a lot of, amazing work together. So, of course, Brazil has also been hit hard by the pandemic, and you have been working under very difficult circumstances during the past months. Maybe you can give us a small summary of what Casa Criatura is and what you were doing before the pandemic, and now how everything has changed.
Casa Criatura started as a space to developing empty spaces around Olinda, because Olinda has a very rich history on cultural background, heritage, and these things. But at that moment, everything was very slow, you know. We had to just change the presidency. Everything was a little bit messy, and people didn't understanding very well how to deal with the situation, especially the cultural sector. And when in the beginning of the year, we start to work with the Caribous program, you know, and we decided to work with Caribous because it was a viable alternative, you know, because on that moment that the country was very politicized, you know, and very radicalized. Caribous was a third way, you know, like, look, this is to care for people, no matter if you're doing it in your company, on your NGO, but the process, it's about care, you know, no matter if you are a right wing, a left wing, a anarchist, or if you just want to care of someone, you can be involved in Caribous. So that was the main reason we got involved in Caribous. And this was before the pandemic really started. When the pandemic started, the Caribous and the gig initiative and the networking we were having with other parts of the globe, especially Singapore and Italy, that were having a very stressing situation in that moment, we could go into the Secretary of Health of Olinda and start to talk with them, look, we can produce something, what do we really need, you know? And we could have, like, we had 3 weeks in advance of the virus, you know, so the protection and the maker movement arrived in Olinda before the virus. And this was really important, you know, because with that situation, with partnership with another maker labs and with the Secretary of Health, some hospitals, we could, look, we need face shields, we need these masks, and that's it. We don't need anything more. Let's focus on that, you know? So that was really, really interesting the way it worked.
That's super fascinating to hear. It's really interesting to hear how in the very, like you said, politicized and complex situation that Brazil is permanently in, a project like Caribous can provide a common language, like be something neutral in that environment to bring people together and find a common ground to work with. That's super interesting on its own, but also the fact that because you were connected to other places around the world, you had an alert system and were able to react quicker. So things that, for instance, the US president didn't manage to do, you managed to do at Casa Criatura, which is to brace yourself for what was coming. And if I understood correctly, you switched from basically being a very vibrant community space to being the provider of PPE to your community, and in particular also to communities who would otherwise be marginalized or perhaps discriminated in the Brazilian health system.
And this is quite interesting because for this cultural background that we had, at some point, we could notice that, look, it's not just the health sectors. We have our neighbors, we have our cousins going to work, we have to protect them. And then we start to develop what we call the Desmuni collection. So it's the collection for the ones that are not immune to the virus, you know, so you are Desmuni. And so we made turbans, hats for children, hats for rastas. And so we make a whole of different products for the day by day. And, you know, for artists, for people that need to go to streets and protect yourself with style, you know?
Yes, and also not just with style, but if I understand, just with the sensitivities for the different cultural nuances, with the different layers of culture that exist in Brazil, and giving the space for maybe plurality and expression, even in the dark times of a pandemic.
And you cannot forget the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, it was at the same time, and Black Lives Matter, how to protect half of Brazilian population is Black. and those population were working and were dying, you know. So how to protect this population?
Yeah.
So it was quite intense. And for the health sector, in the other hand, at some point we had delivered so many masks, and other makerspaces in Recife also donated a lot of masks. At some point we had more than 30,000 masks donated in Recife. So we started to develop this other product that is the aerosol box, you know. And the special thing about that was a doctor from the intensive healthcare unit asked us for a box. He said, look, there's this Taiwanese box, but it doesn't work well for the Brazilian environment. We have different training rules, we have different ways of doing this. So we need a different box. And we could work together with some doctors, some medicine students, and some designers to develop this better box for the local context, you know. And also share online, it was quite interesting because in one hand we could provide the product, but in the other hand, because of legislation and because of an intensive care unit, you need to make sure it happens, you know, it works fine. So we could not put it inside in a hospital, but 2 school hospitals are already using it. So we are trying to get patent on it, open patents, and try to understand how can we move forward with this product for the future to come, you know, for the next pandemic.
It's really amazing to hear the sort of innovation spirit of the maker community stepping up in times of crisis, and not just printing materials where you can copy paste designs, but also being innovative and coming up with new designs and improving things as you go along. And I think the aerosol box is a really great example for that. Can you share with us maybe what the current situation is like, and what you're working on right now, and perhaps also if there are any ways that you would, I know, given the very difficult situation in terms of the political situation in Brazil, how you could be supported?
Very different from the other parts of the country. Recife had could flatten the curve and could like scale down the numbers of patients, you know. And like 3 weeks ago, we had 600 sick persons and, you know, infected persons, and 23 in hospitals. And we have 4 million inhabitants, so quite okay, you know. The rest of the country is in a really terrible situation, political situation, just like you said. It's much better than House of Cards, you know, because every day is a new thing, so you can really enjoy it. But now we are trying to move forward and understand how we can care better, you know. For example, how could face hunger in our community? How can we target that hunger in the community? You know? So we are trying to start this biofermentation labs as part of a care maker initiative, you know. We have a restaurant, and we are trying to harvest fruit around some places and spaces that we are working together with biologist groups and things like this, so we can deliver a healthier food to our community, you know. So we are trying to understand now what else is care, and how can we better care of our community. So at this moment, we are working with, like, you know, educational training. How can we train better our community? But given this perspective of it's urgent, you know, it's happening, and we must do something.
I can't thank you enough for for being part of GIG, and I can't say enough how incredibly proud I am to be working with you. I also think it's just so profound how grassroots actors such as Casa Criatura are playing such a fundamental role in providing basic social services to their community, whether it's food security or medical supplies, and the really critical role that these kind of organizations and communities and people like yourself are playing today. Thank you so much for this interview, Ricardo.
Thank you, Geraldine, and likewise, it's a pleasure to work with everyone in Gig.
Thank
you.
Thank
you very much.
Please take care of yourself.
Okay, bye-bye.
Oh.